Well, since Nick Haley conceded to Trump, it's clear that unless something really unexpected happens, he's going to be the next Republican candidate for the presidential elections in the United States this year. And many NATO countries are preoccupied because country has been quite vocal about these countries not spending 2% of the GDP with defense.
They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills. I said, no, you have to understand. You don't pay your bills, you get no protection. It's very simple.
Well, Trump is not right that these countries should pay something for NATO. I mean, like there is a bill to pay and they are not paying. They shouldn't pay anything to NATO. In reality, these countries have to spend 2% of GDP with defense. And from these 2%, these countries should spend 20% or 0.4% of the GDP in capabilities. Like not spending with wages and other things, but precisely with capabilities. And well, I agree with Trump. All NATO member states should spend at least 2% of the GDP, and very importantly, they should spend well, because it's useless to spend 2% of GDP in defense if 90% of the defense budget is wages and pensions and social guarantees and so on, right? It's necessary to spend well this money. But one thing that's not discussed very often one question is, why aren't these countries spending at least 2% of the GDP with defense? And the answer has 3 points. The first one is a divergence of strategic interests, because for the countries more in the north, for the countries with borders with Russia, of course Russia is the biggest threat, considered the biggest threat. While for the countries in the south, they don't consider Russia to be a threat. They are preoccupied with other things, for example, immigration or terrorism coming from North Africa and the Middle East, etc. So they really don't consider that there is some sort of urgent threat. And because there isn't a urgent threat, so therefore they don't see the necessity to increase spending with defense. At the same time, and then we go to the second point, it's the issue of austerity policies. And well, what does economics have to do with that? It's quite simple. The European Union passed a resolution limiting the government's debt into 60% of the GDP. Now, many countries not spending at least 2% of the GDP with defense, they have government debts higher than the 6%. Let me give you some examples. Italy is more than 130%, Portugal it's roughly 120%, Spain is 95 and 96% of the GDP, and so on and so on. Many countries are already running budget deficits, not only to pay for this debt, but also to have a normal functioning state and to keep some aspects of the welfare state, which are important and are related to the third point I'm going to address very soon. And on top of that, on top of this 60% limitation, there is the European Central Bank increasing interest rates very, very much. And well, so if the countries already have a debt, with the European Central Bank increasing the interest rates, well, these countries have to pay more for debt, to service the debt. So, and this also reduce the possibility of increasing the defense budget. And in reality, I would argue that this entire system we have, economic system we have of central banking and monetary policy, and in many cases fiscal policy, which is based on an ideology, I call it ideology, which is Chicago's monetarism, which resulted basically give the fundaments with parts of the Austrian school to neoliberal policies. And my point is that, well, these policies, they are good for the economy. I mean, they are good in the sense that they work. Well, you increase the interest rates, you reduce inflation. We can see this, it's happening. It's always happened like that. But the question is, why is it reducing inflation? Because it's creating recessions, because it's reducing the level of economic activity. Then the central banks, by increasing the interest rates, on the one hand, they increase the service of government debt, so it's less money to spend with defense, but on the other hand, it creates a recession, or in economic language, will reduce the level of economic activity. But by reducing the level of economic activity, the government will get less in taxes. The government has less money, and then the government has to consider the limits, the caps from the European Union for government debt. There is a higher interest rate set by the European Central Bank, and then getting part of the money, increasing the amount of money that has to be directed to debt, and it reduces the level of economic activity, then making the government to get less in taxes. So austerity, economic neoliberalism, Chicago's monetarist economics, they are bad for defense. I'm sorry. And now we come to the third point, which is the relationship between the state and society, mediated by politics and economics. And now it's very much necessary to remember that when Clausewitz said that the war is a continuation of politics by other means, Clausewitz in reality was thinking that the ultimate objective of warfare is political. And therefore, war is not only kinetic, war is not only about using the armed forces, but any way to achieve this ultimate grand strategic political objectives, they are part of war, and the Russian and the Chinese think very much in these lines. So the question is that a society believes that the state broke the social contract. If we look into data from the European Social Survey, from the World Value Survey, the Eurobarometer, and so on, we can see clearly that society believes that the system is rigged against them, that they cannot influence politics, they don't trust many institutions from the government, they don't trust either, in many cases, business. They absolutely do not trust finance. There is a huge sentiment of relative deprivation, and so on and so on. So why is that? Well, the answer is simple. The answer is that because of finance and because of this new liberal austerity and Chicago's monetarist, Austrian school economics ideology, well, there is no such a thing as society anymore, right? There isn't such a thing as the nation. We have individuals. That's one of the main tenets of these theories, right? There is this notion of the methodological individualism. And because of that, people are convinced, increasingly, not totally, but people are increasingly convinced that the state broke the social contract. And this is why also the states won't spend more with defense. Not all countries, but many countries. NATO members will not spend more with defense, because there is a thin line keeping the political and economic system in check. Because at the end of the day, in democracies, people elect, and we can see that right wing, that populists, both left wing and right wing, their popularity are increasing. The Netherlands is one example. In Portugal, there is another example, Orban in Hungary, and so on. So these non-traditional, let's call them this way, these non-traditional political forces, they are gaining popularity. And that's because of the many people believe the social contract has been broken, as I mentioned before. But this is the result, direct result of political choices related to the economic model we have. And in this case, if the state increases spending with defense, well, the state has to reduce even more the budget in health, education, and so on, and that might create problems that malign foreign agents could exploit against these countries in the form of psyops, influence operations, hybrid warfare, by creating political instability, by creating social unrest, by creating resentment, to achieve their political objectives at the strategic level. And finally, to finish, I want just to note that if you look into Russia's strategic objectives, and if you look at the countries not spending at least 2% of GDP with defense, the biggest problem is exactly near many countries not spending 2% of the GDP. First, in the Black Sea region, because in the Black Sea, we have Ukraine. Ukraine is the Black Sea. What other countries are in the Black Sea, which are NATO members? Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey. So only Romania spends more than 2% of the GDP. Well, if something bad happens in that region and spread towards, Croatia, Albania, and so on, these countries are in the Black Sea. In the Mediterranean, and these countries, they are not spending 2% of the GDP. And well, Italy is there, not 2% of the GDP. Spain, not 2% of the GDP. Portugal, not 2% of the GDP. Other countries not spending 2% of the GDP, the Netherlands, France, but France is a nuclear power. I don't think that Russia will do something will try to do any adventure against a nuclear power. But then the Netherlands not spending, and even Belgium, the home of NATO headquarters, Belgium isn't also spending 2% of the GDP with defense. Norway wasn't, but Norway declared that now in 2024 it's going to spend 2% with defense, and this is very good, because the next place where Russia might do something, where it's very sensitive for Russia, is the Arctic. And all countries with interests or borders or parts of its territory in the Arctic region might be subject to some sort of Russian adventure. And Denmark's not spending 2% of the GDP with defense. And for example, although the Danish said that they will soon. So it's and it doesn't have to be, a direct attack and so on. Russia might test NATO's Article 5 in the Black Sea. That seems more logical. Or in the Arctic, because of its interests. Because Finland spends more than 2% of the GDP in defense, the Baltic states, Poland, and so on. So, if supposing Donald is becoming the next president of the United States, we are all cool, because we're doing our job. But the overall risk is that by putting doubt in the validity of NATO's Article 5, the result might be the contrary. Instead of forcing these countries to spend more and having peace, it might just stimulate Russia to go into some sort of adventure to test waters, and escalation might follow and things might become very ugly. Let's hope not. All the best.